My name is Akin, and I'm the Academic Dean of Hartford Seminary. And welcome to tonight's talk. I think you're in for a treat, real treat. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, let me say a word about the format of tonight's talk. After my brief introduction, the speaker will give her presentation. Then afterward, you will have a Q&A session, so where you can ask questions and comments and so on. Okay? So let me introduce tonight's speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce the Reverend Dr. Shanell T. Smith at her first public lecture to the Hartford Seminary community. She is a lot of things to a lot of people, but she likes to identify herself first and foremost as a child of God. I hope many of you will get to know her through taking her classes, by attending her future lectures and workshops, or by reading her writings. That I am confident that the importance of her relationship with God is evident in her teaching and scholarship and in her life. Now I turn to some of her credentials. She received a BA from Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, the Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary in Princeton, New Jersey, the Doctor of Philosophy from the Theological School at Drew University in Madison, New Jersey. Do you get the sense that she might be from New Jersey? She could be a Jersey girl, right? She's an ordained minister of Word and Sacrament in the Presbyterian Church, USA. Dr. Smith, of course, is also the assistant professor of New Testament and Christian origins here at Hartford Seminary. Now, her scholarly interests include feminist and womanist biblical interpretation, gender and sexuality in the New Testament, and in this summer, she's going to teach gender and sexuality in the Pauline letters this summer. And the intersections of postcolonial, African American, and New Testament studies, particularly with regards to the book of Revelation. In her faculty page, she describes her philosophy on teaching, scholarship, and leadership in this way. Dr. Smith remains dedicated to preparing leaders for ministry in today's multi-faith world. Her passion for teaching is fueled by her desire to inspire and challenge by bringing together faith and intellect. She continually works to create and maintain a safe space for intellectual dialogue, critique, and analysis in the classroom, enhance the status of women in the profession, mentor students by helping them recognize, embrace, and capitalize on their potential, and publish works that will further New Testament scholarship by inciting others to engage. I'm confident that she will amply demonstrate her philosophy tonight, and you will be convinced that she means what she says. In short, get ready for some inspiring, inciting, challenging, and so on. You will think differently about the woman Babylon after Dr. Smith's lecture tonight. Perhaps we all will see ourselves in the woman we too easily scorn. Without further ado, the Reverend Dr. Shanell T. Smith.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here. I am deeply humbled and honored by your presence here tonight. This evening, I just want to speak a little bit about the topic, the marks of empire, a message from the woman Babylon in the book of Revelation to the city of Hartford. When one hears the word Babylon, Peaceful images such as sun-kissed blue skies, the serenity experienced from lying in a meadow with colorful flowers, and all things beautiful are not what emerges. Rather, the word Babylon evokes a totally different picture. In the Christian Bible, the name Babylon refers to a human empire at its most destructive, one that oppressed peoples and boasted about its wealth. The name stood for various types of evils. Now, the book of Revelation takes the name Babylon and its infamous reputation and applies it to Rome, the empire that reigned during the time Revelation was written, around 86 or 90 CE, during the time of Emperor Domitian. But the author of Revelation takes this image a step further. Not only does he rename Rome Babylon, but he also encases that empire in feminine flesh. Rome, renamed Babylon, becomes the woman Babylon, and ultimately a whore. Now, it is important to note that John's depiction of Rome as a whore is based on the long tradition of casting enemy capitals as whores. However, when I take a closer look at John's description of the woman Babylon from my cultural perspective, things get even more complicated and problematic. The manner in which he vividly describes her destruction, coupled with the description of her body, which includes an inscription on her forehead reminiscent of a slave tattoo, causes me to pause unsettlingly. As I will share with you tonight, the woman Babylon not only represents empire, but she is also indicative of a slave, both at the same time. It is her duality, her two-ness, that incites tension within me, because she reflects ever so sharply my continual conflicting reality of being simultaneously a victim of and a participant in empire. I never expected to read a text, and that of the woman Babylon no less, that would reflect back to me aspects of my identity with which I either have not come to terms with or refuse to embrace. Her text forced me to recognize and admit certain realities, such as my privilege and participation in the capitalist structures of the United States, and at the same time, consider how I might continue to protest about my concomitant victimization within the same context. The text of the woman Babylon frustrates my ability to efface or blur inequalities, not only between me and others of my own racial ethnic background and minority status, but also between me and my Euro-American female counterparts. Needless to say, my encounter with the woman Babylon in the book of Revelation has not been uneventful. And tonight, I will ask you to think about your own situation and determine if the tension that I experience with and in empire can easily be your own. As I considered my own encounter with the woman Babylon in preparation for this talk, I wondered what she might say to the city of Hartford. Can Hartford judge the woman Babylon? Is Hartford in the position to point fingers at the woman Babylon for her imperial ways? Cannot forms of oppression also be seen here? Said differently, if the city of Hartford were to take a good long look at the woman Babylon, would an image of itself be reflected back to it? I suggest that the answer is yes. The woman Babylon and the city of Hartford, much like the woman Babylon and myself, have more in common than one may think. It might be just like looking in a mirror. Well, almost. Now that I've given you a brief introduction, let us now move to the reading of the text. Now you should know, however, that when I read a passage of the Bible, I really get in it. Some of my students are here, they can probably vouch for that. I like to enter into the story's world and experience it as if I'm there. Sometimes I'm a bystander, an eyewitness, and sometimes I even like to pretend that I am one of the characters, especially if a female character, in order to see how I would react to what's going on. Now, some scholars call this type of reading imaginative readerly engagement. Now, all that means is that when you read a text, it involves entering into the fictional world as a participatory reader. You feel and see and hear and touch your way through the narrative. This way of reading can be cathartic, and when reading the book of Revelation, it involves the emotional release of anger, grief, guilt, and joy in the midst of crisis. Entering into the fictional world of Revelation involves facing fear and a whole range of feelings. And this is exactly what I do with the text of the woman Babylon. I invite you to participate with me. Revelation chapter 17, verses 1 to 6 and 15 to 18 reads, "Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, 'Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore who is seated upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and with the wine of whose fornication the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk.' So he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her fornication. And on her forehead was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of whores and of earth's abominations. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly amazed. And he," meaning one of the angels, "said to me, 'The waters that you saw, where the whore is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the whore. They will make her desolate and naked. They will devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by agreeing to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth.'" The woman of Revelation 17 is no ordinary woman. She appears to live the good life. We find her exhibiting royalty. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding a golden cup. Even John himself is captivated by her. Dressed by John, she represents the imperial center of Roman power that will be destroyed and overtaken by God's empire. John is adamantly opposed to Christians who excessively accommodate themselves to the cultural norms of Roman society, such as the imperial cult. Now, the imperial cult not only refers to the worship of the emperor, but also reflects the relationship of the people with the emperor through imperial statues, temples, inscriptions, coins, public festivals, and holidays. And here is a picture where I went to Greece a few years ago. That is the exact size of Emperor Domitian, the remnants. And you see the size of me and the size of his arm. So they were huge. Despite the possible consequence of ostracism and persecution, John instructs his Christian community to take a stand against and completely remove themselves from the Roman way of life and endure. Ultimately, what John insists is that the Roman Empire will be destroyed and God's empire will reign. His urgent caution and apparent concern for his fellow Christians is noteworthy. However, as a woman, his encasing of the soon-to-be fallen imperial city of Rome in feminine flesh is problematic. Not only does he give the command of God to come out of her, my people, in Revelation 18, which is loaded with sexual undertones, but he vividly describes the annihilation of Rome through the destruction of her body. When her discursive construction is complete, that is, when John has finished using her body to describe the excessiveness and wickedness of Rome, he quickly removes her regal attire, leaving her naked, and ultimately decides that she is both edible and expendable. John provides much detail to describe the woman Babylon, forcing the reader to see her voyeuristically. Her beauty is emphasized so much so that Scripture says John was amazed by her. In true pimp fashion, John wants the reader to buy what he is in fact selling. And that is the grandiose picture of Rome, which is doomed to destruction. However, the woman Babylon is also his victim. For all the brilliance of her appearance, her destiny is destruction rather than salvation. She will be hated, made desolate, and naked by the beast and the 10 kings. After taking one last look, they will eat her flesh and burn her up with fire. The very ones who were in relationship with the woman Babylon and who benefited from her services viciously turn on her. Though John fashions the woman Babylon literally, as indicated by her lavish attire, as one exhibiting and benefiting from imperial riches, he quickly illustrates in horrid detail her destruction. So yes, as a woman, I have a problem with John. However, as an African American woman, my issue with him goes even deeper. The woman Babylon is not only associated with imperial power, but also represents one who is subjugated by it. She is marked on her forehead with an inscription that states, Babylon the Great, mother of whores, or ponon in the Greek, and of earth's abominations. Now, markings on the body, such as tattoos and branding, were commonplace in antiquity. Penal tattooing was inflicted on delinquent slaves, on criminals, and on prisoners of war. However, in the case of the woman Babylon, the mark of ownership on her forehead is conjoined with the profession of prostitution, details that are consistent with her identification as a brothel slave. The term pornée denoted a slave woman forced to have sex with whoever desired her and who was placed under the supervision of a brothel keeper, similar to what some would call a modern-day pimp. Representing both subjection as a brothel slave woman and prestige as an empress, imperial city, the woman Babylon is a character of ambivalent identification, both and. She is positioned on both sides of the colonial divide. Taken together, she is the brothel slave woman as empress, imperial city. Or interpreted in my cultural context, she at once represents the slave and the slave master. Now, how did I arrive here? How did I come to this type of reading of the woman Babylon? I am so glad you asked. My reading is based not only in an understanding of the text of the woman Babylon in its ancient historical context, but I also employ two additional interpretive lenses: postcolonial biblical criticism and womanist criticism. Postcolonial biblical criticism focuses not only on how biblical texts were being legitimized as colonial and imperial enterprises, but also how they have been used to resist and interrogate such enterprises. Now, in fewer words, it is the critical analysis of empire in biblical studies. And in simpler terms, postcolonial biblical criticism looks at how the Bible was used to colonize people, to justify ownership of an already occupied land, and to convince or force the people as to the right and acceptable way not only to behave, but to believe. It also looks at the ways in which that same Bible was used by oppressed peoples to resist such measures. Womanist criticism, the other lens, is a way of reading the text through the lens of African American female experience. Womanism, a term created by Alice Walker, describes the unique social, cultural, historical, and theological experiences and understandings of African American women. It emerged in the 1980s, not only in response to sexism in the Black liberation theology, but racism also in the feminist movement, and additionally, independently out of women's culture and experience. Although womanism recognized Black liberation theology's major contribution of its analysis of systems of racial oppression, and feminist theology's analysis of sexist oppression, the fact of the matter is the concerns of Black women in both theologies remained an afterthought. Having suffered from what is known as double jeopardy, and that is African American women's experience with both racism and sexism, womanism helped to create a space that African American women could call their own, and where they didn't have to choose between either their race or their sex. To be sure, however, the creation of womanism did not involve a definite isolation from white feminists or Black male theologians, but rather became more and more solidified through their interaction. I decided to combine postcolonial biblical criticism and womanist criticism because they complement each other well, each filling in the gaps where the other is found lacking. For example, a womanist analysis helps to position the experience of African American women as the starting point for biblical interpretation and offers ways to name that experience, while postcolonial biblical criticism provides a vocabulary that helps identify the various interlocking structures of domination and the feelings and emotions caused by them. By employing these two lenses, I came to the conclusion that the woman Babylon is a character of ambivalent identification, represented by her imperial and subjective descriptions. And I struggled to engage with her text, because the more I studied it, the more I began to see reflections of myself, namely my simultaneous victimization and participation in empire. Now, I should be clear that my reaction to her text is just that, mine. What I seek to offer is a representative presentation of the woman Babylon, as I do not and cannot speak for all African American women. It takes no daring hermeneutical leap for those who have either experienced or witnessed racial or colonial oppression, marginalization, and domination to recognize the ways in which the woman Babylon has suffered under the discursive command of the author of Revelation. The stark, refracted reflections of the mirror flash out certain experiences of African American history and those we face today. I get glimpses of myself and my ancestors when I look at the woman Babylon. Her forehead inscription and the labeling of her as Cornet or brothel slave calls to mind the oppression from slavery that my ancestors endured, including my great-great-grandmother, Indiana Grant, who was a former slave. Isn't she great? Bible scholar Clarice Martin succinctly captures this traumatic experience. The 400-year-long history of slavery within the United States is a history that began with the indelicate experience of the overseas slave trade to the Americas, including the devastating genocide of the Middle Passage and chattel enslavement in America, all of which resulted in the tragic loss of what Pulitzer Prize-winning laureate novelist Toni Morrison calls the 60 million and more. The woman Babylon's labeling as a brothel slave recalls the sexual abuse to which my ancestors, especially female, were subjected by imperial authorities. The fact that both the woman Babylon and African slave women's bodies were at the disposal of their imperial pimps and masters and then destroyed at their whim is not easy to ignore. The scarlet beast that the woman Babylon had to ride reminds me of the slave owners or white colonizers who forced black women to pleasure them in whatever way they desired, only to be hated, ridiculed, and punished afterwards. In fact, the slave owners' wives stigmatized slave women for the sexual misconduct their husbands, the slave owners, directed toward female slaves. Although repeatedly brutally raped, the slave owners' wives referred to these slave women as concubines, which suggested that slave women had a choice in the matter. For me, the narrative of the woman Babylon evokes the hard experiences of blacks in American slavery. She may have been eternally labeled as a brothel slave via her forehead inscription, but black slaves, although perhaps branded for punitive purposes, did not require such an explicit identification. Their skin color alone was enough to identify them as that which has no value. Now the other side of the woman Babylon, that is her association with imperial power, as suggested by her regal attire and accessories, and her association with the kings of the earth, call to mind some contemporary African American women's participation in the city, that is the socio-economic metropolis that is America. Not only do some African American women have individual educational privilege, but they also benefit from other structural privileges, such as home ownership, safety, health care, private transportation, and access to luxury goods and services. This association of some black women, including myself, with the capitalist system of America understandably conflicts with our experience as victims of these same structures. Bible scholar Renita Weems captures this tension in a captivating reflection of the paradox of being both a minority in a capitalistic society, but also a woman of privilege when in the company of other minorities, even those of the same race. As an educated and employed African American woman, Weems is painfully aware of her difference when she notices the black janitress who cleans the floor upon which she walks as she goes on her way to an executive meeting. Our academic and economic privilege, therefore, may hamper our ease to claim a minority and therefore oppressed status when in the company of other underprivileged persons. So as you can probably surmise, the woman Babylon's text has raised some difficult questions for me. How do I reconcile the tension that the woman Babylon's duality, that is both her victimization and participation in empire, elicits within me? How do I negotiate between my struggles with the memories of my ancestors in the American slave system and the benefits I receive today from those very same capitalistic structures? Should I just ignore the text and say it has nothing to do with me and just proceed as normal? Should I become crippled by it, go into a shell and become paralyzed with the notion that I just might be a hypocrite or a fraud? Or should I embrace my newly realized reality by remembering my past, my ancestral history with slavery, recognizing my present, my access to that which was once denied African Americans, and use it all to reshape my future? I choose to embrace it all. And it is my hope tonight that each of you will do the same. Because by the looks of it, I can't possibly be alone in experiencing this tension. All we have to do is look beyond these walls. In the city of Hartford reside some of the most affluent and the most destitute people. a distinction that is seen within 3 to 5 blocks in either direction of this seminary. It reminds me of some parts of New Jersey where I'm from, particularly the city of Newark, so I am not here to judge. In my short time here, I have witnessed, more often than not, that people stay in their economically defined areas. And where there are places of economic crossover, such as in the magnet schools, some either are upset about it, some are excited about it, and others still could care less about it. But I wonder, what are some of the ways in which we can bring people together? And tell me if this already occurs, to make sense of this lived out tension. How can we bring the lower, middle, and upper classes together for the common goal of making a greater, as in better, Hartford? I am talking not only about making life better for the less privileged, but also enhancing the communication and interaction between these economic groups. Now, some of you may be thinking, where do we start? I believe that we begin with a fundamental goal of understanding. And as I learned from my reading of The Woman Babylon, that begins when we start to see ourselves reflected in the mirrors of others. This occurs when we gather together to mutually understand each other, noting any similarities and acknowledging any differences through attentive and compassionate listening and non-aggressive communication. For example, what have you learned about yourself, whether positive or negative, by looking at how your family member, fellow churchgoer, or colleague acts out her or his faith, or just plain old acts out in spite of it? What have you been prompted to do, to change, to let go of, due to these encounters? How has your life, your faith, your way of thinking been altered, made anew, or enlivened due to a dialogue that took place in the classroom, on the job, in the local store, or even on the street? Similar to the Woman Babylon's text, our lives serve as the text that others will read. What will they learn? What will be reflected to them? Think about what can happen if, in one room, this type of intentional understanding occurred between people of different economic walks of life. A room full of people from all parts of the city of Hartford who are knowledgeable of either how it feels to be oppressed or have been witnesses of its devastation, can help frame the right questions and determine the appropriate and pertinent conversations that need to occur to effect change. This powerful and life-changing information, coupled with people's association with empire, that is, their access to the right people and organizations, can bring about a much-needed change. An honest and active engagement among people from both sides of the economic divide can result in great benefits for the city of Hartford. However, one must be willing to be vulnerable, to be open to the ideas of others despite the risks involved. As Renita Weems writes, it will not be easy. In fact, it will be very difficult. It will require a deliberate effort on our part to listen when it is easier to dismiss. At times, it will mean that we must be willing to confront the evil in us as a community of women and men, as we are to point to the evil in the world. It will require a resolve to work at bettering ourselves and the situations of others, both in spite of and because of the pain. The future of the city of Hartford depends upon our resolve to walk headlong into that which makes us different, and to march straight into that which binds us as a people of God. If we don't, who will? As you can see, I just don't do biblical scholarship, but I make it practical. As a mother of my home church would say, what good are all those big words if they don't do anything good for the people? Get it out the air and make it touch the ground. Make it real. So it has and forever will be a goal of mine to find ways to make my scholarship applicable to the everyday life situations of all people. My goal tonight was not simply to illustrate my particular context-based interpretation of the woman Babylon, but to make it useful. So, without further ado, a message from the woman Babylon in the book of Revelation to the city of Hartford. That is what I can imagine her saying. Be open to the possibility that you can learn from me, despite what the writer of Revelation may have said about me. Don't be afraid to recognize within yourself some of the things you noticed when you read or heard about me. Embrace it. Embrace it and come into a fuller realization of yourself in all its complicatedness, and let it empower you. Use what you've got, or as the supposed imperial fashionista in me would say, work it. If you have a big mouth, a way with words, this is the woman Babylon talking, not me. If you have a way with words, use that gift to bring attention to the sufferings of others and the causes that seek to address them. If you have financial means, invest in something from which someone else can benefit. If you have extra time, volunteer. The right connections, ask for a favor. If you can cut hair, do it for somebody who can't afford it but needs to look presentable for an interview. Whatever you have, use it. Every small action counts and can add up to be something great. Just look at my larger-than-life negative reputation based on every small detail the author of Revelation wrote about me, talking about my involvement with empire based on things as how I dress and how I practice fornication, how my drink of choice was full of abominations, how I was so bad that I had a tattoo on my forehead that labeled me a whore, and how I deserved such a horrific death. But I digress. Basically, city of Hartford, what I, the woman Babylon, not the whore Babylon, am trying to say is whatever you have, and whether or not it is due to your association with empire or your victimization by empire, let it empower you to do great things, not only for those less fortunate than yourselves, but for the benefit of everyone. Thank you.